Hello friends, this is a new video about disturbing stories from Reddit. Before you start watching, I would like to ask you to like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. So, I used to work night shift at a fast food restaurant. I left work at 2 a.m. and I was driving home when a man jumped in front of my car, of which I drove a pickup truck. I quickly stopped and he jumped in the bed immediately and started slamming on the back window frantically while telling me to drive. He seemed panicked. I drove fast and swerved a bit and eventually parked in front of a convenience store. At the time, I always kept a kukri and a metal pipe in my car. I got out with the kukri in hand. I told him to leave while threatening him with the kukri. He begged me to keep driving and I told him to leave again. He ran to the doors of the convenience store, but it was locked as the clerk was in the restroom. Then he got in the back of what seemed to be a taxi in the parking lot and just sat there. Frightened and full of adrenaline, I got in my truck and left. I don't know what was happening, but it seemed like he was running from someone. As an adult, this story doesn't really scare me anymore, but I would be lying if I said it doesn't bug me to this day. Back in 2015, when I was about 10 years old, we had recently moved to a small suburban neighborhood where our new house was being constructed. My father was working in a different country, so my mom, my older sister and I stayed in a rental that was in the same neighborhood until our home was ready. Truth be told, I never really liked the rented house. It wasn't creepy or anything, but it always seemed isolated. Nobody within a 2 or 3 house radius seemed to stay longer than a few months, and it never gave me the homely vibe. Something about the place just rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe I just missed my old neighborhood. Over the next few weeks, we did get adjusted to the house, and I didn't really mind it anymore. Being a duplex, a kitchen, dining room and living room downstairs and 3 bedrooms upstairs. If I yelled for my mom from my bedroom, she wouldn't be able to hear me if she was downstairs. So I was always cautious of being alone in any room. I know, I seem like a paranoid guy, but it was a new house and I watched too many horror movies. Coming to the incident. About 2 months in, during summer vacation, I invited 3 of my close friends for a sleepover. We had fun all day and decided to end the night with a horror movie, Ouija to be specific. We turned off all the lights, drew all the curtains, pulled an old mattress onto the floor and played the movie. My sister and mom had gone to bed an hour ago. If you watch the movie, you would know that in the beginning itself, there is a scene where the sister of the protagonist is home alone when the power goes out and only a single light flickers. A few seconds later, she is possessed by an evil spirit and kills herself. Not exactly the Starry Night of horror films, but hey, we were kids. Now I shit you not, and I can have the other 3 guys attest to this as well. As soon as that scene ended, the power went out, and the whole house turned pitch black at 1 a.m. in the morning. Ooh, scary, right? I bet we could make a movie out of this. Anyways, we found it funny, hilarious actually. Power cuts, although infrequent, were not uncommon in the neighborhood, so guys being guys, we burst out laughing. We tried scaring each other by grabbing at each other's arms in the dark, but not a moment later, our hearts dropped. I still remember that sound, the sound of an old fluorescent light bulb slowly coming to life from behind us. My friends were scared, but I was terrified. I remembered that light bulb. We had a handyman come check it out, and he said that when the entire wiring of the house was redone, they never bothered connecting this bulb back to the circuit. Wasn't really required anymore, so they cut it off, the handyman claimed, before moving on to the next room. And since we were just short-term tenants, we didn't really bother with it either. So there we were, in a pitch-black house with just a single light bulb flickering, just like in the movie. A second passed, and then another one. Noon could move, Noon could speak. It was dead silent. And then finally, we screamed. A scream that ripped through the silence of that night. My mom and sister, bewildered, came racing down the stairs. They were asleep, but they heard us. Our neighbors would have heard us too if we had any. By the time they reached the living room, we were running away, as far away as we could get from the light. I needed to get out, away from that light, away from the house. I lunged at the main door and had just cracked it open when my mom came up from behind and slammed it shut. She was pissed. If my friends weren't there, I would definitely have gotten a smack across the face. It took a while, but the power finally came back. Once my sister managed to calm us down, we went to the dining room and explained everything, to the last detail. My mom just stared back at us, dumbfounded. She did see the light flickering but assumed it was a prank by one of us, boys being boys. The light had never worked before, even when there was power, yet somehow both of them thought we had something to do with the flickering light. After an hour of arguing, we decided to give up and just went back to our rooms to sleep. None of my friends spoke through the night. We were all wide awake but too afraid to speak. After what felt like an eternity, morning came and my friends' parents were back to pick them up. We said our customary goodbyes and they left, leaving me alone, the only person left in the house who knew something was wrong with the house. Days passed, I was still pretty shook up and stopped going to the living room by myself. Eventually, you do learn to move on, but then it happened again. While my sister and I were at the local market, my mom was alone at home when the power went out again, and the light, it came to life again, flickering, just like that day. My mother, being the devout Christian she is, thought it was a miracle. She called it God's light since it provided light within the darkness. She would claim that there was a presence protecting us, but I refused to believe that. My sister too refused to believe that, but that was only because she still thought I had something to do with it. Anyways, over the year, we had our share of power cuts, and every single time that light bulb would come to life in the darkness, and it started from the night I had my sleepover. It started with that very scene in the movie. My friends never came over again, and I knew better than to ask them. Everyone we told brushed it off as a prank, but my mom continued to believe it represented something divine. I knew better. There was something off about that house. Something within it was mocking me every time that light would illuminate. Whatever caused it may not necessarily be evil, but whatever it was, had no business being there. Once the new house was finished, I put the entire incident behind me. Some of the guys from that night would bring it up once in a while, but the conversation would always end in uncomfortable silence. Over the next few years, my friends and I went our separate paths and then finally left for college. I haven't spoken to them in years, but I know that they remember that night. They felt what I felt. I just graduated college a few days ago and was back home when I decided to go for a walk. I came across the old house, the same as it was 10 years ago. It looked like someone was living there, but I wouldn't dare go back inside. I wasn't planning to write this, but I saw a post earlier about haunted houses and it hit me like a punch in the gut. I haven't thought about that summer in years, but now I can't stop. I grew up in a small Bulgarian town, and when we were teenagers, we used to go exploring. Old factories, abandoned schools, that kind of thing. You know, dumb stuff. One of my friends, Miro, said his grandma had this house out in the countryside, a few kilometers from town. Nobody had lived there since his grandpa died. He said we could go there for the weekend. No one will bother us, we can drink and smoke in peace. The moment we saw the place, I got this weird feeling, the kind where your stomach sinks before anything even happens. It was one of those old one-story houses with a broken fence and a yard full of weeds taller than your knees. The windows were covered in grime, and there was this musty smell that hit you as soon as you opened the door. Inside, everything was exactly how someone might have left it 50 years ago. Old wooden furniture, yellowed lace curtains, family photos so faded you couldn't make out the faces. On the wall in the living room was a big round clock. Its hands were stuck at 12. We joked about ghosts at first, like any group of teenage idiots. But after midnight, when the laughter died down and the beer cans emptied, it got quiet. Too quiet. Around 1 a.m., I went outside to take a leak. I remember how bright the moon was. The air was still, almost heavy. I was zipping up when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I froze. Turned around. Nothing. Just the wind moving through the grass. I went back inside and told Miro someone was walking around the yard. He looked at me dead serious and said, "That's normal. It's just Grandpa. He died here, but he never really left." I laughed at first, waiting for him to crack a smile. He didn't. Before I could even say anything, something thumped from the next room. A heavy sound, like a chair tipping over. We all looked at each other. That room was completely empty. Then came another sound, a slow dragging like wood scraping across the floor. And then, tick. We turned toward the old wall clock. Its second hand, which had been frozen since we got there, started moving. Not forward, not backward, but both. Tick-tock, tock-tick, tick-tock. One of the guys said, "What the hell?" under his breath. The sound filled the room, louder and louder, echoing off the walls like there were 100 clocks ticking out of sync. That's when the lights flickered. No one said a word. We just ran outside. We lit cigarettes with shaking hands. The night felt colder now, like the air itself had changed. Miro lit one extra cigarette and stuck it upright in the dirt. "For Grandpa," he said quietly. We stood there watching it burn. The tip glowed red, then faded, then red again, like someone was taking slow drags. When it burned down to the filter, Miro just stared at the ash. After a while, we decided to go back in. The living room felt different, heavier somehow. The air smelled faintly like smoke, though none of us had smoked inside. And the clock. It was working again. The hands were moving, smoothly. 2:57 a.m. We just stood there, staring. And when the hands reached 3 o'clock exactly, the ticking stopped. That perfect silence. I still remember it. You don't notice how loud silence can be until it feels alive. Miro's face went pale. He just said, "He's gone," and walked outside. We left not long after that. None of us said much on the way home. It's been years, and that house is probably gone now. But sometimes when I'm up late and the world's dead quiet, I swear I can hear that same clock ticking. Tick-tock, tock-tick. I don't believe in ghosts, but I never asked Miro what happened to his grandpa, and I don't plan to. 2 years ago, the night before Halloween, my friend and I went to a park around 11:30 p.m. to carve a pumpkin. The lights were still on, and the park sat right beside a quiet little neighborhood. It felt safe. Before we even got out of the car, a black cat ran across the road. My friend, superstitious as hell, asked if this was a bad idea. I laughed it off. We set up under a pavilion. The woods were about 200 feet away, silent, dense, watching. Then, right after midnight, Halloween now, the lights cut out. Everything went black. Suddenly from the woods, "Hello," robotic, broken, wrong. We didn't move. Then again, "Hello." Closer, I turned to my friend and saw the whites of his eyes glowing in the dark, wide with pure, silent terror. I grabbed his wrist and ran. As we sped out of the parking lot, another black cat darted across the road in front of us. One Sunday afternoon a few years ago, I was in my parents' bedroom, playing a computer game on their laptop. I was kneeling by their bed, right next to the window. The laptop was resting on the bed. After a little while of playing, the shutters opened. However, nobody else was there, and the window was closed. I definitely thought it was super strange, but I just decided to ignore it and keep playing. Well, I kept playing for maybe 10 to 15 more minutes. But then, out of nowhere, the shutters slammed shut. And I mean they slammed shut, loudly. Nobody else was in the room. I was the only person in there. I totally froze. I was paralyzed. I could not move. After I could move again, I left the room in a panicked hurry. I don't think I'll ever know what that was. Several years ago, I, now 35F, used to post funny things on FB that would happen to me on a regular basis at night after kids were in bed. Legit things that you just couldn't make up. One of those things would be along the lines of me being exhausted, young mom of 4 kids all under 7, and seeing reflections of a person in the back door glass and freaking out only to realize I wasn't wearing my glasses and it was my own reflection. Now, around the same time I started posting these funnies, 2014-ish, my husband started a graveyard shift job at a company that was 30 minutes away from our house. One night I was laying in bed, and from a light outside casting a shadow on our wall, I saw what looked like a person walk by our bedroom window. I laid still and stopped breathing to concentrate. Then I saw the same shadow go by again in the opposite direction. I panicked and called my dad, who lives 7 minutes from here, then called the police. Of course, my dad showed up first, brought his firearm and checked the backyard. He came back inside just about the time an officer showed. I told him what I saw and he went out back and checked. While he was checking, I called my husband and he said he was heading home. This was around midnight. Cop comes back in and says he didn't see footprints or anything that looked disturbed or that would suggest someone being back there. I looked at Dad and we thanked him and he left. I told Dad my husband would be home soon and he could go. Husband made it home in 15 minutes. Like I said, it's a 30-minute drive, so he was booking it, and immediately went out back to check. Guess what? He heard noises, a bump against the fence and someone running down the alley. He ran to the fence, yelled things into the darkness I won't repeat, and came in to stay up all night to make sure they didn't return. Shortly after this, he made me purchase a firearm for protection and I immediately stopped posting the funnies. Side note, did you notice how the cop didn't see footprints, but my dad had already been out there and we knew he had left footprints behind, dew had already fallen and prints were easily seen. While we respect our officers and support them, we don't trust a lot of their work or expertise. If my husband hadn't come home that night, my unknown visitor would have stayed, and God knows what would have happened. I haven't shared this before, but it's been on my mind. In high school, a friend's mom was going out of town. She planned on having people over, but for whatever reason it ended up being her, and I having a sleepover. She may have cancelled the party plans to not get in trouble. Regardless, everyone in the small town knew about it. About midnight, we heard scraping sounds coming from the back bedroom. We thought it was friends trying to freak us out. It continued, but we didn't see anything. This went on for a while and we were getting scared. We peeked out and saw this person's head in the large front window. He had a distinctive hairstyle, so we knew who it was. He was a very quiet guy that was always around but seemed out of it. No one really knew his story, but he was always on the fringes of things. We thought he was weird but harmless, so we called the police and they looked around. They found pry marks on the back bedroom window frame. We told them who we saw in the window. Nothing else happened that night, but we were pretty scared. Cut to a few years later. The person that was stalking us that night broke into a house and brutally murdered a woman that lived alone. It was a town tragedy. The family ended up tearing down the house and leaving an empty lot. I'll never forget seeing the shadow of his head in that window. This is an old story, but still scary AF. I was 12, maybe 14. I'm a male that doesn't get spooked easily, even when I was 13. We had just moved to this new house. I loved the outdoors, still do, but this is the story. I couldn't wait to explore the woods behind the house. The first few times I went in, it was fine. Peaceful, fun, just hiking, nothing wrong. But the 9th time I went in, that's when things got real. I saw something walking. I thought it was a deer, but deer have heads. This didn't. I wanted to get a closer look because I was confused. I got within about 20 feet of it when it suddenly ran. I chased it all the way to the edge of the woods. Then it was gone. When I turned around, I saw a man about 20 feet away. A young man. I called out, "Hey, who's there? This is private property." No response. I walked closer, and he faded. He literally turned to dust. I walked over to where he had been standing and found a squirrel, its head cut clean off, like it had been done with a knife, not teeth. My face went cold. I turned, and there they were. 10 feet away from me stood what looked like a clan of ghosts. They were all facing me. One started walking toward me, laughing. I tried to stand my ground. This was my home. I didn't want to be scared of the woods I lived beside, but when I saw that thing coming closer, I just couldn't. I ran. As I was running, something hit me in the face. I looked down. It was a doll, stitched together to look like me. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. I didn't stop until I reached the house, and when I turned to shut the door, I saw it again. The deer man thing standing at the edge of the woods watching. Now, whenever I go into those woods, I keep my 12 gauge with me. That's a shotgun for those who don't know. Stay safe. When I was still in school, I would normally take the bus most of the time until I got my license. The bus stop wasn't far from my house at all. It was just a few blocks. There were 2 separate paths that you could take to get there from my house. One was just walking along the road and taking a right, walking down some more road, and then you would be there. The second path was just a straight shot to the stop, but it was through a patch of very thick forest. The first path was maybe like a 15-minute walk, while the second path through the forest was about 10 minutes. I was running late one day and decided to take the path through the forest. It was the start of winter, so it was pitch black outside at the time I had to wake up for high school. I was either a freshman or a sophomore at this time. I started on the path and kept my face pointed forward despite the eagerness to look over my shoulder at every little snap and crack. But just as I saw the bus stop through the trees, I heard a very loud snap. Like a tree had just been ripped apart, it was so loud that it echoed in the fields surrounding the area. I stormed forward, terrified out of my mind. Thankfully there was another kid there, I think his name was John or Jay. We were in the same grade, so I debated bringing up the loud crack, but I didn't want to sound crazy if he somehow didn't hear it. But he beat me to it and said, "Dude, what the hell was that? Did you hear that?" Mind you, it was still pitch black out and we could barely see each other standing like 2 feet apart. I didn't know him very well since he was newer to our school. I didn't really want to bring much attention to it, thinking that if it was something supernatural, we should just ignore it. So I simply nodded, and he picked up on my unwillingness to talk about it, and he also just nodded. I was standing way closer than I normally would, since I'm incredibly awkward, so I would just stand on the opposite side as everyone else. But this was a special exception, so I just stood a couple feet away, seeking just a semblance of comfort from what had just occurred. He went on his phone and so did I, but I felt like something was watching me, not behind me but in front of me. I just moved my eyes to look, keeping my head down, and saw a figure dash into view about 13 feet away. It looked like a deer, which is very common where I'm from, so I just ignored it until I felt so uneasy that I had to take another glance. It stood up. Stood up. I looked over to the other kid, hoping that he had also been seeing that, but he was glued to his phone. I looked back, and at the same time, whatever the hell that was looked at me. It was still dark as night out, so I couldn't make out any facial features, just a shadow. It looked back, and then got back down on all fours and ran so incredibly quick that it was just a blur. It ran back into the field that was behind it, and not a minute later the bus pulled up. I walked onto the bus first, and the kid sat behind me, and before he sat down said, "That was crazy." It was the most serious I had ever heard him, so I know he at least caught a glimpse of whatever that thing was. Does anyone know what it could have been? It still haunts me to this day. Hello 4CHAN, I'm a disbeliever that has his own ghost story that seemingly has absolutely no explanation, but it's so fucking mundane and boring it doesn't make me believe. For years, every time I've thought about it, I always want to find the real explanation because I don't want it to be real. Finally, I'm coming to you to debunk something I already don't think is real because I haven't been able to do so. Backstory: I grew up with my grandpa in a big-ass house that used to be a church until he bought and renovated it. The upstairs was for some reason infamous among all the kids and even some adults for either being creepy or outright haunted. Even all the way up to 16, I had some friends who refused to go up there alone because it scared the shit out of them. Most specifically, shit always happened around Slash in the toy room at the very end of the upstairs hall. It was basically just a playroom for any of the dozens of kids, grandkids, great-grandkids that came over. MISC, lead-up encounters. Multiple kids and adults have claimed to me and my grandpa to have heard voices or weird noises upstairs. Around 12 to 14 years old, a family friend said a spirit upstairs had warned them someone was going to get hurt. Later that day, my friend broke his arm jumping around in the toy room. At around 14 to 15 years old, I had 3 friends stay overnight in my room downstairs. In the morning, my grandpa absolutely lost his shit on us for destroying the toy room, telling us to clean up after ourselves, even though we were never in there. We went upstairs to clean it up, and it was like a fucking tornado went through the room. Every single possible item and object was thrown across the floor. There was also a pair of real police handcuffs I'd gotten from some family member who stole them. As a kid, I was playing around and cuffed one of my toys to the pool table. I had no key, so the cuffs remained stuck to the table for years. They were broken in half at the chain when we were cleaning up. This isn't a LARP, and I am not fucking schizophrenic. I have made a post about this before, but it's gotten even more terrifying. To make a long story short, I have this habit of obsessing over a very specific kind of woman that I've created in my head, and every time I do this, a woman exactly like that enters my life, or my social media, sometimes down to the exact fucking name. Well, this is where it gets very creepy. I played The Sims a few months ago. I created myself and a woman. I made her the ideal woman. She had a very unique look, basically my perfect wife. I remember when I was making the sim, I felt a strange connection, as if she would appear in the real world. Well, guess what? A few days ago I met this chick. She looks identical to the sim. I mean really identical. And I don't just change the hair and skin on the sim. I take time to change everything from eye spacing, cheekbones, everything. This chick is the spitting image. And she is obsessed with me. She literally came from nowhere and is obsessed with me. I'm not hallucinating it. I'm not LARPing, I'm not crazy. I have the ability to manifest actual fucking humans into this reality. Why? Am I Neo? Am I the nobody? Is this world a simulation? Are these women demons? I don't trust them. I don't trust anything anymore. I keep ignoring her messages because I'm scared. I usually never interact with these women and avoid them, but I've actually been talking to her. You people may think this is a joke or even a blessing, but it's not. It's terrifying. Am I even real? I lived in a very peaceful village that was very safe for kids, but it had some scary stories that were passed from one generation to another. Aren, I won't write about those stories. I will tell you my story that I still can't explain if it was real or if it was just my imagination. My uncle had cowshed near his new house. That cowshed first was used as old house by our family around World War II. Then later they made new house next to that old house and turned it into cowshed. House was made of rocks and some materials that they could afford at that time, so it looked very old and creepy. One day my mother told me that we are going to visit uncle and his wife. Day was sunny and it was summer. We came to their yard and we had to pass near that cowshed. Under that cowshed was very dark basement under earth, and it had window that was just like square-shaped hole in the wall close to earth. You could feel cold air coming from it. As we passed by it, I looked into that hole into darkness, and suddenly unbelievable thing happened that is still carved into my memory. From that dark basement hole jumped some humanoid-like creature that was bald, pale, and it had blue veins on his face and sharp teeth and dark eyes with yellow pupils, almost like there is no life in those eyes. It stretched its hand to reach me by my leg. I could hear how it clenches with his teeth. My mother pulled me by my hand. Then I just started to scream and cry, and after that I can't remember anything. I know that we spent time at uncle and his wife's house. That cowshed is destroyed shortly after that, and I never saw that creature again, but I still remember it clearly. It's in my memory. Imran 26, and when I was 15, I once asked my mother do she remember anything, and she said that it never happened. I work for a property management company in Michigan. About 10 years ago, we got a major contract with the city of Detroit, and my boss sent me down to run it. Was best salary of my life. Obviously, there are a lot of abandoned houses in Detroit. At the time, the city didn't even know how many. The estimate at the time was about 130,000. Part of my job was to assess the properties for demolition in specific areas the city was trying to revitalize. Their plan never worked, but we made a fortune on it. So, we would find a lot of bad shit in these houses. Piles of heroin needles, dead dogs, stolen shit, ammo, you name it. And yes, we would find dead bodies. In some cases, the cops didn't even care to look at anything, and a city worker would stuff some of the bones or rotting flesh in a trash bag, and who knows what they did with it. Usually it was bones, and they didn't care cause the remains were assumed to be druggies or gang killings, and most of them probably were. The creepy shit to me wasn't these cadavers, some of which were sitting in chairs or in a pile of ashes. Some of the houses we went to looked like someone had just got up in the middle of dinner and left years earlier. Plates with rotten, desiccated food sitting on the dinner table, clothes still hanging in the closet, remote control on the couch. I'm not sure how that happens, but many of these abandoned homes look like the inhabitants had vanished. Our only explanation for it was that they had been the victims of murders or drugs and nobody ever collected their belongings, so their homes were just frozen the way they had left them. Don't know how else to explain it. Anyway, the real creepy shit happened in fall when we were preparing to demo a whole block. Had a bulldozer there already. It was a pretty dangerous area, and every house had been burned by arsonists except for one. So here's a creepy short but not so boring story, but weird. So growing up in a low-income home, not poor broke, but just not as good as how other people had it. I grew up in a mobile home and still am. Me and my other two siblings shared the master bedroom since it was spacious enough for the three of us, while our parents occupied a smaller room. But as long as I could remember since I was a kid, we had this old antique closet we got from our relatives like a decade ago that was portable with a small door where you can open and hang your clothes like a normal closet with drawers on the right side. We still have it. The closet is about 6 to 8 feet tall and gives out creepy vibes, but you forget that it's there half the time. Moving on to my strange encounter. I'd say it was a fall night and could have been around 12 to 3 a.m. in the morning. Me and my little brother shared a bed and slept on opposite ends. Obviously, people might wake up half asleep with their eyes open for a bleak moment when they hear a noise or just feel something, so as followed I was sleeping one night and could feel and hear something. My door creaked open, and what I saw next got weird. I couldn't move, but I knew I was awake. While I had one eye open and felt tried as hell, I saw 5 to 7 shadowy figures enter my room. I couldn't make much out of their facial looks, but I could see their clothes in good details. These humanoid figures were dressed all in black with odd clothing, that of some old English poetic cloying. Some of these figures were from 3 to 7 feet tall and were all wearing what seemed to me pointy hats, and were all lined up and entering the closed door one by one in single file as if it was some kind of doorway to another place. As soon as they were gone, I immediately went back to sleep. Since that day, I never really gave it much thought, but it felt as real as remembering anything small, like a birthday or a field trip. Anyone else ever had such an encounter? I'm in my second year of law school, and this story happened about a year and a half ago, during exam revision time in December. I was sharing an apartment with a good friend. We didn't study the same thing, but we went to the same university. This friend loved going out, and that night she suggested we go to a nightclub. I refused, wanting to get some rest so I'd be sharp for my exams. She called her boyfriend instead, and they both left around 11 p.m. I studied until midnight. Then, as I was dozing off, I got a call from her. She told me she had forgotten her keys on the coffee table in the living room. I went to check, and yes, they were there. I called her an idiot. She laughed and apologized. She asked if I could stay up until she came back around 4 a.m., but it was only 12:30 and I knew I'd never stay awake that long, nor wake up to answer her call. So we found a solution. Next to our front door there was a small window. From the inside, there was a narrow ledge just beneath it. If I left the window slightly open, she could push it open from outside and grab her keys from the ledge. We decided to do that. I went back upstairs to sleep. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to noises downstairs. Cupboards slamming, heavy footsteps, voices whispering, things falling. I immediately thought it was my friend and her boyfriend, drunk and trying to make food. That would explain the noise. The man's voice even sounded like her boyfriend's, though I couldn't be sure because it was so faint. So I put on my robe and stood at the top of the stairs. I listened carefully, then finally called out, "Sarah!" Fake name. "Is that you?" Silence. No more noise. Total stillness. Then, a few seconds later, the front door slammed. A car engine roared to life, followed by the sound of tires screeching on the road. Instantly, I knew what had just happened. Without thinking, I ran back to my room, grabbed my phone, rushed downstairs, locked the front door, took a kitchen knife, and called the police. I explained everything, and they arrived about 10 minutes later. In the meantime, I checked if anything had been stolen. My iPad and my friends were gone, but nothing else seemed missing. Only the cupboards wide open. The police questioned me and told me they couldn't do much else, but they'd patrol the area for a few days. They warned me never to leave doors or windows open at night. It wasn't a safe neighborhood. I called my friend again, but she didn't answer. She got home at 6 a.m. 3 hours later. I had stayed locked inside, sitting in front of the door, knife in hand. When I told her what happened, she was shocked, and we ended up sleeping in the same bed. I couldn't sleep alone. A few days later, we learned that in the neighboring village, someone had been robbed and stabbed for trying to stop the burglars. To this day, I don't know if it was the same people. By the way, the keys were never found. We assumed they took them. The police advised us to change the locks. The next day, we contacted the landlord, and the lock was replaced that same day. The prison system, not quite the place I ever imagined myself working. Some of the prisons within the state are over 30 years old, and those are the new ones. Several of the older ones are over a century old. These places have seen their fair share of violence and bloodshed. Men come in and become predators, even more become prey. It's in places like these where one can truly see what a man can do to another man. Many leave reformed, but many more leave having learned how to be a better criminal. No air conditioning in the summer within the cell blocks, combined with the tempers of men who believe they're the toughest on the yard. It's the perfect recipe for violence. Many have come into the system and never made it out, whether because of their sentence, another inmate, or their own hand. But sometimes something stays behind, sometimes that something is malevolent and it makes itself known, and sometimes there are things outside the walls, lurking in the woods or the empty land beyond, that make even the worst inmate look tame. That's where my story begins. These places of concrete and iron hold the most dangerous criminals known to man. But outside those walls, there are things much, much worse. For safety reasons, I won't mention my name or the facility where I work, but this is my story, an encounter that still haunts my mind and keeps me uneasy on foggy nights. One of the most important daily duties is the perimeter inspection. It's often a peaceful break from the chaos inside. Most prisons have two fences, an inner and an outer perimeter. Inspections are done every shift to ensure the locks are secure and the fence hasn't been tampered with. I was new to the shift, only a few weeks in after training, and I was eager to do it properly. It was 2100 hours. The sun had long set, and a full moon lit the sky. A thick but patchy fog had rolled in from the woods to the west. Soon I was deep within it, my only comfort being my flashlight, my pepper spray, and my radio. Behind one of the buildings, as I checked the emergency doors, I heard what sounded like thunder, but when I looked up, the sky was clear. The sound was coming from the left, across the field. That's where the prison horses were kept, used for search patrols in case of escape. The horses were running full speed across the pasture, then suddenly huddled together, neighing in panic. Something had spooked them, though I couldn't see what. I called the mobile patrol officer on the radio and asked him to come by with his spotlight. He arrived, scanned the pasture, and noticed something lying in the far corner among the tall grass. He said he'd check it out, told me to continue the inspection, and drove off. I obeyed, but unease was already creeping up my spine. Minutes later, I heard him on the radio asking the nearest guard tower to shine its spotlight over the same area. The tower light switched on, sweeping across the pasture. Then the shift lieutenant came over the radio asking if help was needed. The mobile officer asked to meet at the front of the facility. I tried convincing myself it was a simple contraband drop. Maybe someone had left drugs or a phone out there and spooked the horses. That explanation made sense, at least it helped me stay calm. But the truth was nothing close to that. As I continued walking, nearing the tower, I suddenly heard something hit the fence behind me. Hard. I turned left. The chain link was shaking violently like someone was climbing it. Then it stopped. A second later I heard a heavy thud on the ground and saw a massive shadow rise through the fog. Then dart to the left and disappear. My heart stopped. I backed away, eyes locked on the spot, and radioed for the tower to aim the spotlight at my position. The lieutenant came on the radio, asked what was happening. I told him someone had entered the perimeter. He asked if I was sure. I said yes. He sent backup. The tower light swept over the fog as I searched the darker corners with my flashlight, hand shaking around the can of pepper spray. Then I saw it. The razor wire on top of the fence had been bent downward, blood glistening on the edges. Tufts of hair clung to the metal. Whatever it was, it had bled climbing over. I turned toward an area I'd already inspected earlier when I heard deep, heavy breathing in the dark ahead. There was something. A large dark shape uncrouched low to the ground. Before I could aim my flashlight, it began to rise. What I saw next froze me where I stood. The thing stood upright, nearly 8 feet tall. long arms ending in clawed hands, a hunched back covered in thick fur, pointed ears flattening against its skull. Its eyes reflected the moonlight, animal yet intelligent. I couldn't lift my flashlight. I didn't want to see its face. I didn't want to see it. Then it moved. Fast. It swiped at me with one of its massive, almost human hands. I fell backward, breath knocked out of me, scrambling to retreat. Before it could reach me again, 2 gunshots echoed through the night. The creature turned its head, revealing a long snout lined with teeth. Another shot. It leaped over me, scaled the fence effortlessly, and vanished into the darkness. The guard tower officer was still aiming his rifle toward the pasture. Backup arrived moments later. The fear that had paralyzed me began to fade, replaced by exhaustion. I passed out soon after. When I woke, paramedics were treating deep claw marks across my chest. I told them it was a large animal, maybe a bear. That's what the report said too, but those scars didn't look like a bear's. The spacing, the shape, too human. Later, I learned the patrol officer had found a dead horse, its throat torn open, teeth marks everywhere. The official story said black bear. I nodded and kept quiet, but I know what I saw, and it wasn't a bear. Before his retirement, the tower officer, the one who saved me, told me something I'll never forget. We stay inside the facility at night when we can. The old hands know why. The new ones like you think it's just a myth, until it happens. Don't go out there in the night, especially when the wolfsbane is in bloom and the autumn moon is full and bright. I was 15 when I first saw the devil. I was 15 years old when I came across the devil. It was a fall night and I had just come out of my hockey practice. The arena lay between 2 small clusters of trees, small enough that you couldn't really call them forests. But past those, and on the other side of the arena, was the forestry center. This was the place, of course, where all the older kids like to go to make out, smoke weed, spray paint dicks on the side of the utility building. Not that I knew of any of that. By 15, I was a social outcast, barely able to make friends due to being too much. I'd later go on to learn that I was simply neurodivergent, and they didn't know how to handle me. So there I am, leaving practice, walking through the first cluster of trees to the second, ready to cut through the forestry center to make the hour-long walk home feel a little less monotonous. The trees were scary, but at least they were something new to look at. My walk home usually consisted of a few shoddy businesses and a fire and police station. With the forestry center, you could at least be slightly entertained by the local wildlife. Once I leave the first cluster of trees, the sun finally setting, the golden yellow light, that ever-elusive golden hour ending, the eerie darkness that wasn't quite darkness creeping in. This was darkness where you could see in front of you, but just barely, the trees blocking any slight chance to be illuminated by the moonlight. I'm walking, and I hear some twigs snapping in the distance. At this point, I've reached the second cluster of trees, and I'm about to hit the forest proper. I don't really react. The biggest animal in these woods is a deer, and I might be socially awkward and small. My growth spurt won't come till next year at the earliest, but I'm not a baby. I know that no big bad wolf is gonna get me, unless the prospect of chipmunks slowly nibbling you to death is particularly terrifying. As I'm entering the forest, I begin to hear more snapping, but deliberate this time, as if something is trying to draw my attention into its direction. I'm ignoring it at first, shrugging it off as a nice buck that maybe one day my stepdad will shoot with his compound bow. That's when I hear the first growl. It's inhuman and savage, like a hole being torn in a burlap sack. Panic floods my body, turning my spit dry in my mouth and making my pubescent armpits go crazy with perspiration. Fuck this shit, I say as I'm turning to leave the forest. Maybe the highway pathway home isn't too bad. Hell, maybe someone's here and they can drive me home. I laugh to myself, I think in part to hear something other than the uncomfortable silence of the forest. It doesn't work. Fear tightens my stomach into a fierce knot as I try to just keep walking. How fucking far had I gotten into the woods without noticing? I heard another branch break, not a twig but a full-on branch. I broke at that moment, my paralysis being overtaken by pure and total terror. I sprinted toward the opening in the foliage, branches whipped at my face, my arms scratching small shallow cuts, unnoticed. All that mattered was getting out of this labyrinth of fear that I had created for myself. As I scanned the right and left, my eye fell upon my first glimpse of whatever it was. At first I thought he was my stepdad, but his features were wrong and he crouched low to the ground, not in a normal human way. He crouched as if to pounce. "Hey Joe, come here. Your mom sent me to pick you up." The voice sounded like his voice, but something was off about it, as if it was coming through an echo. His eyes glowed. I remember that. They glowed in the early evening light like a cat's eye. I froze in place, unable to move, and forced myself to squint toward the crouch thing. Before I could comprehend what was happening, the creature sprang forward, sliding behind the closest tree to me. I saw the fingers of the thing scrape the tree as I broke for the tree line, hearing the impossibly fast movement of the thing. My stomach lurched as I forced my legs to carry me faster than I ever had before. That's when he caught up to me, grabbing me by the shirt and slammed me into the soft earth, my breath coming out in a whoosh. "Why are you running away from me, buddy?" "You've got no reason to be scared," said the thing, taking the form of my stepdad. His breath was rancid. It smelled like rotting food and stinking dampness, like the dump in the summer. I tried to hide my fear, but it was evident on my face. "I'm sorry, Mike. I didn't mean to run away." "You just spooked me is all," I replied, nervously laughing. I could feel the thing's claws digging into my shoulders, holding me down. "Can you let me up, Mike?" I said, staring it in the eyes. There was nothing human in them. The thing looked at me coldly. "Of course, Joe, no problem. You can do whatever you would like. I'm not going to stop you." The thing answered in a voice that was somehow too wavering, almost high-pitched but in an animalistic way. It was also drooling, not a lot, but enough that a few drops landed on my white t-shirt. I could feel the grip loosen on me, and as soon as I did, I squirmed out from underneath its hand, breaking into a full run before my legs knew they were moving. I could hear the thing let out a growl that could only be described as prehistoric, a screech that echoed through the rows of trees. I could see the clearing in the trees. I even saw cars moving through the parking lot. My nerves eased as I broke through the trees. I didn't dare turn around, I just sprinted through the double doors of the forestry center shed. I startled a forestry employee who spilled his coffee and shouted, "Hey, what the fuck, kid? I'm sorry, I just thought I saw something in the woods and I had to get to somewhere safe. I can just wait for my ride. They're supposed to be here any second." I laughed nervously, my sweaty, drool-covered shirt stinking of the fear I had just exuded. "Okay, do you need me to call anyone? Need a drink? Anything? You're looking pretty pale, bud. You should sit down. You're Mikey's stepson, yeah?" he said, handing me a bottle of water from a mini fridge that was sitting beside his desk. A tap on the window made me and this Forest Center employee. I think I remember that his name was Jack? Maybe Jeff. I met him once when I was younger. Both jump and look wide-eyed at the thing pretending to be my stepdad grinning at the glass. "Oh, good. Your stepdad's here to pick you." "Ooh," he began, before I cut him off. "That's not my stepdad. It's wearing his skin, but it's not him," I managed to say, barely above a whisper. "What did you say?" Jack asked, his hand reaching toward his walkie-talkie. He clicked the button and spoke into the receiver on his shoulder. "Hey, Bob, you notice anything weird about the forest today?" he asked, smiling back at the thing standing glaring through the plexiglass at me. "Please, just listen to me." "I know it looks like him, but it's not him. You have to believe me," I started, but was cut off by the walkie's response. "Hey, Jack, yeah, I was gonna let you know. We found a bunch of dead animals, deer by the looks of them. Hard to tell. Their skin was peeled off. Nothing was eaten, though. They're just skinned. We've been dealing with this shit show to think of even telling you. What do you think, hunters?" "What kind of hunter skins their prey without taking any of the meat?" Jack responded, slowly looking up to see the creature at the door reaching for the handle of the small shed. It stopped suddenly, and in the same not-so-right voice said, "Come on, Jack, let me in." I'm just trying to get Joe home safe to his mom. Did I see a flash of anger in those reflective, animal-like eyes? I think I did. Just open the door and get him yourself, Mike. Nothing's stopping you. Just out of curiosity. What's your wife's name, Mike? Jack replied, pulling his drawer open. I saw a buck knife lying in its sheath. Jack reached for it and the creature's eyes locked on his hands, tracking every bit of him reaching for the knife. Come on, Jack, you've known me for over 20 years. It's me, just open up, or I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your forestry shed down. Ha ha ha, her name is Mary. Of course. The creature laughed, or at least its version of a laugh. It sounded like marbles being rolled along a concrete floor. My mom's name is not Mary. This was not my stepdad. When I make my move, you fucking run. You hear me? Jack muttered, not letting his lips move too much to give away his plan to the thing standing outside. The creature's eyes were not in the slightest filled with joy at this point. A look of malice and hate darkened every bit of its expression as Jack unsheathed the knife and yanked the door open, knocking the creature momentarily off balance. It dug its back hooves into the dirt to remain on its feet after being knocked out of its spot. That's what it had. Not feet, but hooves, jammed into my stepdad's old New Balance running shoes. The hooves had ripped holes in the heel of the shoes while trying to chase me, it seemed. I saw all of this as if in slow motion as I ducked beneath Jack's arms and broke into a full sprint. I got to the highway eventually and flagged down a car. I heard a scuffle behind me and Jack screaming, but I couldn't risk a look back. When I finally did, I saw two reflective eyes peering from the edge of the woods as I drove off into the night. The nice lady who picked me up used to go to church with my mom. She knew where I lived, and as we pulled up to my driveway, my stomach dropped as my stepdad stood in the driveway, hands crossed over his chest. His eyes were reflecting the fading light, shining. My mother was staring out the window. Her eyes were reflective as well. Well, here we are. Home sweet home. I have been going to a lot of strange celebrations and bizarre parties lately. These are the kinds of parties where everyone wears masks, but I don't. I never liked having my face covered, and honestly, I don't even know why I keep getting invited to them. Still, every time someone takes a photo, I notice the same unsettling thing. The person standing behind me, always wearing a mask, is dressed in my exact clothes. It's strange, unnerving even. I never know how to react when it happens. I just want one photo, one single picture, where I'm the only one wearing my clothes and not some masked figure behind me. At another party, people wouldn't stop staring at me. I'm not used to that kind of attention, and everything felt off. The masks they wore looked half animal, half demonic, twisted, grotesque faces frozen in fake smiles. When they said it was time for a group photo, I already knew what was coming. And of course, there it was again. That same masked person behind me, wearing the exact same outfit. My outfit. I felt sick, angry, like I didn't even belong there anymore. As more of these parties happened, the pattern didn't stop. Every time, the same thing. The person behind me, dressed like me. I started to get furious. Once, after seeing another photo, I snapped. I turned around and started shouting at the guy behind me, accusing him of copying me, mocking me. But instead of fear, everyone just laughed. They were delighted by my rage, feeding on it. I yelled louder, desperate for someone to take me seriously, but they only laughed harder. Eventually, I gave up fighting. I clenched my teeth and tried to accept it, but the anger kept boiling inside. Why was I even invited to these parties? I'd never been popular, never even noticed, but now everyone seemed obsessed with me. Every flash of a camera showed that same masked figure behind me, dressed exactly like me. One night I completely lost it. I turned and punched the person behind me. He laughed, then he punched back, but I didn't feel anything, nothing at all. The crowd around us erupted in laughter. And then I understood. I looked down. I had no head, yet I was still standing, still moving. I realized I had always been wearing my clothes in those pictures. It only looked like the person behind me was dressed like me, because the one behind me wasn't behind me at all. He was wearing my head.
Hi everyone, I'm Liv, 20. And I had a bad experience a few years ago. I must have been around 12 or 13. I had just moved to a new region in the middle of my first year of middle school, 6th grade, so I was starting at a new school. I was a bit emo, still in the closet, and I didn't make many friends, especially since I'd moved to a rather conservative area where being different wasn't very accepted. I was also very shy. After a few weeks, I noticed an older boy, also emo, who seemed to have noticed me too. I developed a small crush, but I was far too shy to talk to him. I think I only spoke to him once or twice, very briefly. One day during the school holidays, I got a call from a blocked number. I used to answer those calls because a relative of mine always called with their number hidden. Thinking it was them, I picked up, but it was the boy from my school. Of course, I asked how he got my number, and he said a friend of mine gave it to him. He knew a lot of personal details about me, even where I lived. I hung up immediately, not out of anger, but because I felt really uncomfortable. He called again, but I didn't answer. When school started again, I began to see him everywhere, much more often than before. It felt like he was always around, eating at the same time as me, hanging out in the same places, leaving at the same time. That hadn't happened before, and I got a really bad feeling about it. The calls kept coming. So I told my mom, and she blocked all calls from hidden numbers on my phone. At the end of the next school year, I changed schools for unrelated reasons. It seemed to stop, though he still sent me friend requests on social media, which I simply declined. A month or two after moving again, I got another call, this time from an unknown number. I didn't answer, assuming it was a telemarketer, but they left a voicemail. When I listened to it, I was terrified. Maybe I was overreacting, but still. There was a high-pitched, distorted beep. Then silence. You could hear footsteps on the street, rain falling, and cars passing by. The creepiest part? It was raining that day, and my house was right next to a busy road. I even recognized the same car horn I'd heard a few minutes earlier. I immediately thought of that boy, but maybe it was unrelated. I still don't know. After that, everything stopped. I moved again, and I'd pretty much forgotten about it until recently. It's not the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, but it's probably the one that left the deepest mark at the time. My name is Roman. I'm 16 years old, and the story I'm going to tell happened last year, so I was 15 at the time. It was summer, and it was very, very hot. It's 3 a.m. when I hear the sliding glass door open. I don't panic too much because I tell myself that it might be my mother, who usually sleeps upstairs, coming to sleep in the living room, which she often does when it's too hot. So I think that if she's too hot, she came to open the doors. You should know that my parents' bedroom is right above the living room. The living room leads to the kitchen and the dining room, followed by a very long hallway with, on one side, a large closet with mirrored panels, and on the other, 4 sliding glass doors. Then my 2 brothers' rooms, who luckily were both sleeping over at friends' houses that night. I go back to watching my movie on my computer when I hear heavy footsteps, as if the person were very heavy or wearing big shoes, like work boots. At that moment, there's no more doubt. It can't be my mother. To be cautious, I quietly crack open my bedroom door. That's when I see, in the reflection of the mirror, 2 men standing with their backs to me at the end of the hallway. I panic. Then an idea comes to me. I lock my door. I open my shutters, hoping there isn't a 3rd man keeping watch in the yard. I open my window, ready to jump, when I hear the sliding glass door open or close again. I'm not even sure. I panic at the thought of jumping and getting caught right away. I look for a hiding place in my room. Then I remember a spot where I used to hide when playing hide and seek with my brothers. I look at my bed and without hesitation, I lift the mattress, then the slats, without making a sound, and slide underneath. It turns out that my bed is a storage bed, with one side full of my old toys and notebooks, and the other side empty, just my hiding spot. Once I'm lying down very quietly, I lower the slats and mattress back into place, then try to calm myself. I quickly grab my phone, which I hadn't let go of since the beginning just in case. I start typing the police number, but right then I hear one of the men trying to open my first brother's bedroom door. Of course, finding nothing. Then my second brother's. He then tries the bathroom and the toilet, and finally my bedroom door, but it's locked. He calls the other guy, and together they force the door, and unsurprisingly, they manage to break the lock and enter. My heart is racing way too fast, and I have only one fear, that they'll figure out my bed is a storage bed and find me. The two men are in my room. One looks at the window and assumes I went out that way. He calls out to the other man, who says, "Damn, she went out." Then I hear them both jump out the window and start running, probably to try to catch me. I don't move. I'm petrified, in shock. Then I hear a car start, and I'm frozen. A few seconds later, I regain my senses and call the police. They tell me not to move and that they're sending a patrol. At that moment, my feelings are mixed between relief and the fear that they might come back. The police arrive, and it's only then that my parents wake up, extremely worried and totally confused. The police quickly explain what happened, then ask my parents which door is mine. They enter, open my bed, and tell me it's okay, that I can come out, there's no more danger. I get out of my hiding place. Still in shock, my mother, panicked, hugs me tightly, and it's only then that I break down crying. The police did several rounds during the following hours, but they found nothing. A few hours later, when the police station opened, we went to file a report. A few weeks later, they called us back and explained that, by reviewing the video recordings from the neighbors and street cameras, they were able to identify the car and, consequently, the two men. To this day, the two men have never given a reason or explained what they were doing in my house, since there were no aggravating circumstances and nothing was stolen. They haven't gone through an immediate trial and are awaiting their hearing, which will take place in 2 years. This event left me with nightmares and panic attacks every time a car passes by our house after midnight. But most of all, it left me with those haunting questions. What would have happened if I hadn't hidden? And what would they have done to my brothers if they had been home that night? Hello, I want to clarify that this story is real, and that it happened in 2022 when I was 11 years old. It's not a very scary story, but I still don't have an answer to what happened afterward. It was noon, and my family and I decided to go to the Elysee snack bar, a fast food place. We ordered and sat right in the middle of the restaurant. We were eating, talking, laughing, until my aunt and I noticed a man staring at her. For the moment, nothing worrying, thinking he just found her pretty. But it had already been more than 30 minutes that this guy had been waiting for his order, which made us worried. I often saw him passing behind my aunt while staring at her, which terrified me. He kept going back and forth to the restroom endlessly. And then, when the meal was coming to an end, we saw two police officers enter and look for someone. They searched the restroom and then the waiting line. They grabbed the man, pinned him to the ground, and pulled 3 knives out of his back pocket. My family was in shock. The police were asking questions, but my question was, what if he was waiting for someone? And if all those trips to the restroom were to contact them? I never got an answer, and I think I never will. Here's my rather short story, but one that left a strong mark on my family. I'm going to tell you a story that happened to us a few months ago. My name is Arcela. I'm 22 years old, and I live with my parents and my brother, Elia. Before I start, I'll explain a bit about our building and our apartment. The main entrance is a large, black metal door that opens with a code. Then there's a second door, white this time, that leads inside. Between these 2 doors are the mailboxes and intercoms for each apartment. Once inside, before reaching the stairs, each floor is separated by a wooden door. Finally, there are the apartment doors. The wooden doors on each floor are usually not locked. They just have simple handles, but some neighbors prefer to keep them locked for extra security. In that case, only they have the keys. We share our floor with just one other family. That night, I was in Elia's room, and we were chatting calmly. My mother was lying down in the master bedroom, and my father was watching a movie in the living room. Around 12:35 a.m., my father walked past our room. We thought he had just fallen asleep and was going to bed with my mother. He looked half asleep, so we said, "Good night, Dad," and kept talking. But instead of going to bed, he came to sit next to us and, looking a bit uneasy, asked if we had heard a noise. Elia, who has very sharp hearing, asked if it was knocking. My father nodded and said he thought it was just coming from the TV, and that's when he told us what had happened. While he was dozing on the couch, he had heard knocking coming from outside. Curious, he looked out the window and saw a woman knocking on the big black door, the one with the code panel. Still half asleep, he thought maybe she was a guest of a neighbor who didn't have the code. That happens sometimes. So he went down to the white door and asked her, "Who should I ring for?" The woman simply replied, "Come, come." Intrigued, my father slightly opened the black door and asked who she was going to see. She replied, "I'm going to the man whose door is closed." Then he thought maybe she was talking about one of the 2 families who keep their wooden door locked. He asked her for more details and she added, "The one with the girl. The problem is, in the building, there's no one who lives with just a girl. There's me, but in the other family on our floor, they have 3 boys and 1 girl." My father found it strange. He closed the door and told her he would check. He went back upstairs to tell us this. We thought he was just watching a movie, but in reality he had fallen asleep for 2 hours on the couch. He hadn't realized it was already that late. And you should know that our residence is very quiet, with no shops or stores around, and the street is completely empty at night. Around 3 a.m., while I still couldn't sleep, I heard a loud noise coming from the bottom of the building. The next day, a neighbor asked my father if he had heard it, and we assumed it was just someone coming home late. Out of curiosity, we decided to check the cameras. That's when we saw something even stranger. The woman wasn't alone. A car had dropped her off in front of the building, then immediately drove away. Then she knocked, which woke up my father. Once he went back upstairs, she stayed a few minutes in front of the building before leaving. But at 3 a.m., a neighbor who works late came home. On the cameras, we saw that he opened the door for her. She went inside but went back down the stairs almost immediately. We don't know who that woman was or what she wanted. She didn't steal anything. She didn't cause any damage. Her face was blurry on the cameras, and we have no explanation for her behavior. It wasn't a serious event, but it's still really strange. Hello, this is my first post on Reddit. I prefer to stay anonymous. Call me Lucas. My cousins' names are Camille, 22, Sarah, 19, and Elodie, 16. Those are fake names. It happened a few months ago. We went to City B for the Yam Festival, a local root vegetable. Originally, we were supposed to go to City A, but we decided to come here for the festival's atmosphere. It was my first time going on vacation with them. I look older than my age, so people often think I'm around 18 or 19 instead of 15, which actually helped me that night. We arrived on Wednesday, explored the city a bit. Everything seemed normal. On Thursday, we attended the concert organized by the town and had a great time. On Friday night, after the concert, we went out without our aunt, just the four of us. We were walking toward a bar when a black car stopped right in front of us. Two guys got out. One was tall and muscular, the other leaner. They looked too confident, and something felt off in their eyes. One of them asked me, "Are those your girlfriends?" I turned toward the girls, unsure what to say. Camille laughed and whispered, "Say you're our boyfriend." I refused and calmly replied that they were my little sisters. They started walking with us, first toward Camille, then Sarah. Each time they got too close, I stepped in silently to block them. Then the taller one moved toward Elodie and tried to touch her butt. I blocked his hand. He told me to calm down, saying, "Relax, man, we understand each other." I just told him no, that they didn't want this, and he needed to stop. After a tense moment, they backed off. We finally reached the bar. The atmosphere was wild. Music, people, the smell of food. I stayed on alert. When I turned to call the waitress, I saw them again. The same two guys at the back, staring at us. I acted normal and suggested taking a selfie to check discreetly. I stood behind the girls, and in the reflection of the glass, I saw them still there. A few minutes later, they were gone. We danced, laughed, had a few drinks. Around 3 in the morning, we decided to go home. The city was almost empty, the streets silent. 5 minutes after leaving, a car brushed past us. I cursed and looked up. They were there, on the other side of the street, walking in the same direction as us. We turned into our alley, and so did they. At that hour, no one should have been around. I let the girls walk ahead and bent down to tie my shoelaces. But in reality, I picked up a stone. I told them calmly that we should grab something to eat at a nearby late-night restaurant to lose the guys. That's when they finally understood. Sarah whispered, "Those guys behind us, they're following us, right?" I nodded. We slipped into side streets, cut through narrow paths, turned randomly. We could hear their footsteps behind us. Then silence. We hid behind a wall, hearts pounding. Then we heard a whisper. "Shit, they saw us." The other said, "Yeah, forget it, let's go." They passed a few meters from us and walked away. We waited a few more minutes before moving again. We finally made it home. Our aunt was asleep, so we didn't tell her anything. No one slept that night. The next day, despite everything, we went back to the festival and enjoyed the rest of the day. But that night, I'll never forget it. We never saw those guys again during our stay. And since that night, I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been there. I still get scared every time I go out after sunset. I'm always on guard. If anyone's reading this, always keep an eye open. Even when everything seems ordinary, you never know who might be following you or why. Hello Reddit, this is the first time I'm writing here, and I apologize in advance for the spelling mistakes. So, to give you a bit of context, I must have been around 7 or 8 years old, no more. I was living with my father. He and my mother were separated. In a manner, It had been built in the 1800s and later renovated. It was turned into apartments, about 10 in total. My father lived in 3 different apartments in that manor. I had never experienced anything strange before until the last apartment. It was higher up in the manor compared to the previous ones. The building hadn't been fully restored. There were still some rooms that tenants weren't supposed to see. But since my father took care of maintaining the large park surrounding the manor, he had access to everything. One day, as usual, I was tagging along with him, and he decided to show me some of the remaining rooms from the old days that still existed in the manor. There was an old kitchen with all the dishes still there, as if the former owners had left in a rush. Big rooms filled with piles of furniture, messy and stacked everywhere. A barn that gave off creepy vibes, and a gloomy cellar that was incredibly vast. Anyway, the manor still had that old-time atmosphere. And even now, when I find myself there alone, I feel uneasy. So, I was about 7 years old or so. At that age, I didn't yet watch horror movies or anything like that. My parents were careful about it. One night, like every other, my dad put me to bed as usual. Nothing strange. But just as I was about to fall asleep, alone in my room, I suddenly heard what sounded like a woman screaming in agony. Being a kid, I already knew that wasn't normal to hear something like that. And every night after that, I would hear it again. She screamed inside my head. Even if I covered my ears, I could still hear her. It was very strange, because along with the screams, there was also a sound like a machine, maybe a grinder or something mechanical. Always the same noise. So it couldn't have been my dad watching the same movie over and over every night when I was sleeping at his place. I never dared to tell my parents about it. I was too afraid they'd think I was crazy. But even today, I still remember those screams perfectly. Sometime later, I switched rooms with my father. He took mine and I took his, which was much bigger. I never heard those screams again. Well, not those screams. In the new room, I often heard crying noises coming from outside, but that was probably animals. As for the woman's screams, I have no explanation. I'm 18 now, perfectly sane, so I don't think I was crazy. I never got an explanation, nor have I ever found one. The few people I've told this story to never believe me anyway.